hours. So that was an extremely deadly form of the plague. This is the germ, Yersinia pestis. And there were actually going to be some historians throughout history who kind of questioned this. And they said, oh, well, was it really this germ? There were some theories that the Black Plague may have been maybe this germ, but also a version of anthrax or a version of some other kind of disease. But what we've seen, and you're actually going to see this in the video that I'm going to show you today, is that archaeologists and anthropologists and historians have been analyzing bodies buried in mass graves during a plague period, so they'll actually dig those individuals up and they'll analyze. And when they did that, when they started to do that more and more, they found that no, it was indeed this particular germ. And by the way, the bubonic plague still pops up occasionally. There are cases of plague that come up in the United States every year. We have a better understanding of what it is, and we have a better understanding of how to treat it. And we're not, in the 14th century where they had no idea what the bubonic plague was or how it spread or anything like that. But there are a couple of cases, interestingly enough, that do pop up. So how does it get to Europe? Well, it spreads along those trade routes. So it begins in Asia, and the best evidence we have is that it shows up first in China. And by the way, when we talk about the population of Europe being affected by the bubonic plague, about half the population of Europe is going to die. That's true in China as well. So the Chinese population is going to be devastated by bubonic plague as well. Here's a really interesting statistic. So in 1350 in China, the population was about 120 million. So in 1350 in China, the population is about 120 million. By 1400, that's 50 years. 50 years, the population in China is about 80 million. And that's because of the plague. So it spreads very quickly. Other places hit by the plague, Egypt. Egypt's population did not reach pre-1347 levels until we get to the 19th century. It takes that long for the population to reach pre-plague levels. So all of those trade routes, as people come into contact with one another, they're going to spread the plague. And we think that the plague shows up in 1347 in Europe for the first time. Genoese shippers traveling from Kaffa, which is in the Crimea, will bring the plague to southern Italy. And it's kind of an interesting thing. So they were in Kaffa. And this was a point in time when the Mongols had control over vast parts of Asia. And there was a siege at Kaffa. And what the Mongols will do is to throw the bodies that had been infected by the plague, because it had spread through Asia before that point. Throw the bodies that had been affected by the plague at those Genoese shippers. And they, in turn, are going to, of course, be infected, and they'll travel on the ships that eventually reach southern Italy and bring the plague with them. And that is how the plague gets to Europe, at least for the first time, as far as we can tell. It shows up in France very quickly by 1349. It's in England, it's in Russia by 1351. So it spreads very quickly. And as far as people figuring out like what causes it, they had no idea. They had no idea. The kind of plague that we most think of, the bubonic plague, we think traveled on infected rats, and then the fleas would bite the rats, and then the fleas would bite the humans. And the plague affects the fleas as well, scientifically. So when they bite the infected rats and the germ or the virus gets into them, what it does is to clog up their system of blood sucking, because that's what fleas are, right? And it causes them to feel the sense of starvation. And so in that sense, they become frenzied. They feel like they have to eat, and if they can't bite the rats, then they're going to jump on somebody else. And of course, rats were everywhere at this point in time. fleas were everywhere at this point in time, so they jump onto humans and they start to bite the humans. And it's when they bite the humans that they open up wounds and put those germs. And that's probably not the best scientific way of explaining that. But at least for history class, of course, put the germs inside the humans. And that, of course, spreads the plagues, the plague to the humans. So they had no idea. They had no idea what caused this. And there are going to be several different ideas. Like, if I do this, it can protect me from the plague. There's this very famous story that I always tell that shows you the ignorance that people had about the plague and how it spread and what its causes were. It's called the Great Cat Massacre. So if you like cats a lot, I'm sorry about this. But there's this town in France, and they tried to figure, they heard that plague was coming, and they tried to figure, okay, well, how do we stop this? And their idea was, well, plague comes because of cats. Cats are carriers because cats look at you strangely, and so what they decided to do was to round up every cat in the town and burn it basically at the stake. So they burned all of these cats alive. Sorry about that. And of course, the irony is that cats do what?
Kill rats.
Kill rats, yeah. So it's a really good example of the ignorance that people had when thinking about the bubonic plague and what caused it and what they could do to prevent it from coming to their particular town. The other thing to keep in mind is there are bouts of plague. There was actually a bout of plague when we talked about Justinian. I said that the plague hits the Byzantine Empire. There was a bout of plague in the 6th and 7th centuries in the Byzantine Empire. And that kills about half the population of the Byzantine Empire. And then we see a bout of plague, the bubonic plague, in the 14th century across Asia and across Europe. And then we see another bout of plague that mostly hits Asia in the 19th century, the 1800s. There are sporadic plague breakouts in Europe, but it's mostly going to be in Asia. So there are three main periods, if you will, of plague. But in those periods, you'll have towns hit by plague, and then you'll have kind of a period where you don't see any cases, and then you'll have a town hit by plague. So there were bouts of plague over time. And after the 19th century, it pretty much disappears, apart from a few isolated cases showing up in certain parts of the world. And mostly it's because people come into contact in heavily wooded areas or areas where there are all kinds of critters and creatures and things come into contact with a critter who has been infected by the plague. Any questions about that? All right, so one of the things that I want to get you thinking about is how the plague affects population in Europe. So as you're watching the video that we're about to watch, keep that in mind. How does the plague affect populations in Europe? Whoops, the wrong tab. There we go. All right, let me get started. And I'll mess with the lights as soon as I can buy. Bless you.
Thank you.